The battlefield hung silent in the black void of space, only the drifting remains of shattered ships moving slowly between the stars and the occasional spark of dying systems flashing in the darkness. The human fleet had been chasing an enemy warband. When the long-range scanners picked up a strange and fractured signal deep within a debris field, the flagship Valor's Reach slowed its advance and altered its course as the commander stood on the bridge, staring at the broken hulls floating. Ahead, he could tell from the patterns and colors on the metal that this was not a human wreck. The shapes were longer, more elegant, and the scars of battle suggested that the fight here had been brutal and recent. The comms officer reported that the signal was weak and fading, and it seemed to be coming from a large vessel caught between the remains of 2 asteroid fragments. The commander ordered a boarding team to prepare, not only because a rescue might be needed, but also because any knowledge from a foreign ship could mean an advantage in the long war. As the shuttle crossed the short distance between the human ship and the alien wreck, the commander watched through the cockpit glass. The alien vessel was once a thing of beauty. Its hull curved and layered like the petals of some strange flower, but now it was torn open by blasts and fire. The interior lights flickered in the darkness, giving short glimpses of empty corridors and drifting objects. Sighed the wreck. The boarding party moved cautiously, weapons ready. The air was thin and smelled of burned metal and chemicals. The walls were lined with symbols and flowing patterns, the meaning of which no human could read, but all could feel. The weight of an ancient and proud culture that had fought hard before falling here. Bodies floated in the zero gravity, some still holding weapons, their armor unlike anything the humans had seen. They pressed deeper into the ship, following the beacon, and soon they found a sealed chamber barely holding pressure. The door hissed open, and inside lay a figure on the floor. She was unlike any alien the commander had seen. Her skin was pale with a faint shimmer, almost like silver dust, and her eyes, though heavy with pain, glowed faintly with an inner light. Her clothing was torn, but still bore signs of royalty, with a crest that repeated across the walls of the chamber. She tried to rise when the human stepped forward, but her strength failed, and she collapsed against the floor. The commander knelt beside her, his suit's translator crackling to life. She looked at him with a strange mixture of pride and desperation, and then she spoke, her voice soft but sharp, enough to cut through the hiss of failing systems. She said, "Marry my daughters," and as the words left her lips, her body gave way, and she fell into his arms unconscious. For a moment the commander froze, trying to understand what had just been said. Was this a trick, a coded message, something lost in translation? But the translator showed no error. The words were clear and deliberate. The team medic checked her quickly, saying she was alive, but her injuries were severe, and she would not last long without proper care. They had to get her back to the flagship immediately. The commander lifted her weight easily in the low gravity, though she felt oddly warm against the cold of his suit. They moved quickly, retracing their path through the ruined corridors and back into the shuttle. Every shadow seemed to watch them as they left the wreck behind. The enemy that had done this could still be out there, and the debris field offered many places to hide. Once the shuttle was secure, the pilot broke away from the wreckage and sped toward the Valor's Reach. The commander could still hear the echo of her words in his mind, "Marry my daughters." It made no sense, at least not yet, but he knew the request carried weight. There had been no fear in her voice, only a deep urgency, like someone entrusting the final safeguard of something precious. Back on the flagship, the medics took her to the surgical ward, surrounded by a small group of guards. The commander stayed outside for a moment, staring through the glass at the alien queen lying beneath bright lights. While machines worked to keep her alive, the term queen was not yet confirmed, but everything about her posture, clothing, and the reactions of the few surviving crew they had found suggested she was no ordinary figure. The prisoners they had taken from the wreck were being held for questioning, and perhaps one of them could explain why their leader had given such a strange request to a human soldier. Fleet's admiral sent a brief encrypted message to High Command, reporting the unexpected discovery, and the possibility of diplomatic significance. He made it clear that until the situation was understood, no one was to speak of it outside secured channels. The commander returned to the bridge to oversee the fleet's movement away from the debris field. The scanners picked up faint signs of other ships at long range, but they could not confirm if they were hostile or scavengers drawn to the wreck. The fleet moved into a denser asteroid belt, using the rocks for cover while they plotted a return route to friendly territory. As the stars wheeled slowly outside the viewing glass, the commander thought about the war they had been fighting for years, and how strange it was that, in the midst of endless destruction, one encounter could shift the course of things. The alien queen had spoken as if their fates were already tied together, and he wondered what kind of world her daughters came from, what traditions demanded such a request, and whether accepting or refusing would bring salvation or ruin for both their peoples. He had no answers, yet only the memory of her silver-lit eyes, and the way her voice had carried those words like an unbreakable command. The alien queen awoke slowly, as if her mind had been drifting far away, and the first thing she saw was the soft white glow of the med bay ceiling aboard the human flagship. She felt the steady hum of engines through the bed beneath her, and the faint smell of unfamiliar air that told her she was no longer among her own kind. Around her, the medics moved quietly, checking her vital signs and adjusting the alien translation device that now rested near her neck. Guards stood by the door, silent but alert, his armor polished and his weapon ready. When she tried to sit up, a wave of pain moved through her body, and she lay back with a controlled breath. The commander entered the room, stepping to her side, and for a moment, they studied each other in silence. She spoke first, her voice faint but carrying that same strength he had heard on the wreck, her words emerging through the translator with only a small mechanical delay. She told him that her name would have no meaning to him, and that what mattered was the reason she had made her request. She explained that her people had been fighting for generations against a relentless enemy, and that this last battle had destroyed most of her remaining fleet. Her homeworld was far away but not beyond reach, and her daughters were the only surviving heirs to the throne. She said that without a bonded protector recognized by their ancient laws, her daughters would be considered unfit to rule, and rival factions would rise in blood and war to claim the crown. She told him that among her people, marriage between rulers and allies was not simply about love, but about sealing an unbreakable oath that bound worlds together in peace and duty. She believed that humanity, with its courage, its adaptability, and its stubborn will to survive, was the only ally who could guard her bloodline against extinction. She had chosen him because she had seen in his eyes the same resolve she once saw in her own father when he defended their people. The commander listened without interrupting. His mind weighed the implications. If what she said was true, then agreeing could tie humanity to a foreign empire in ways that could change the course of the war. But he also saw the danger. If their enemies discovered her location and her weakness, they could destroy not only her people, but also anyone who tried to protect them. He asked why she trusted him, and she said that, in her culture, there were signs in a person's voice and movement that told truths beyond words, and that when she looked at him on her dying ship, she had known he was someone who could carry the weight of such a vow. Conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the admiral, who came with a report from intelligence. The wreck they had found had been tracked by enemy ships before its destruction, and there were signs those ships were now searching the surrounding sectors. The admiral questioned whether the Queen's request was a trick meant to pull humanity into an unnecessary conflict, but the commander spoke for her, saying they owed her a chance to explain fully before passing judgment. The admiral reluctantly agreed to give her temporary asylum until a council could decide the matter. That night aboard the flagship, the commander found himself unable to sleep. He walked the quiet corridors of the ship, thinking about the wars humanity had fought, and how many times alliances had been forged in moments of desperation. He wondered what her daughters would be like, and whether they understood the weight of what their mother was asking. Meanwhile, in the hangar bay, a group of mechanics worked late to prepare the landing craft that would eventually take the Queen to a secure location. Next morning, the medics reported that her condition was improving but slowly. Her injuries were deep and strange in nature, as if the weapons used against her had been designed not just to harm, but to drain her life over time. She remained calm through the treatment, speaking little, but watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. The commander visited her again, and this time she asked about humanity's own history. He told her of the long struggles to unite their homeworld, the conflicts that had nearly destroyed them, and the moments when cooperation had been the only path to survival. She listened intently and said that perhaps they were not so different after all. Later that day, a coded message arrived from a small Allied vessel. It was carrying passengers under heavy disguise and claimed to be fleeing an enemy patrol. The commander ordered it to dock under strict security. And when the airlock opened, two figures stepped out. Their appearance matched the Queen's, though they were younger and dressed in plain traveling clothes. One moved with quiet dignity, the other with a sharp alertness, as if expecting danger at every turn. The Queen, when she saw them, rose from her bed, despite the protests of the medics, and crossed the room to embrace them. They spoke rapidly in their own language before turning to face the commander. The translator confirmed what he already guessed. They were her daughters. The older daughter thanked him formally for saving their mother. The younger studied him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, as if trying to measure whether he was worthy of the trust their mother placed in him. The Queen then introduced them properly, explaining to the commander that each had been trained for leadership since birth, but that without a recognized bond to a powerful ally, they could be challenged by other claimants to the throne. She repeated her belief that a union with humanity would not only protect them, but could bring peace between their peoples. Commander realized that the decision ahead was far more complicated than a simple yes or no. It was not only about political duty, but also about the lives of the two young women now standing before him, and the countless citizens of their world who would be affected by his choice. Before he could speak, however, the ship's alarm cut through the air, warning of an unidentified vessel approaching at speed. The admiral's voice came over the comm, ordering all hands to battle readiness, and the commander knew that the delicate matter they were discussing would soon be tested by the threat closing in on them from the dark. Beyond the hull, the alert continued to pulse through the corridors of the Valor's Reach as crew members rushed to their stations. The commander left the med bay with quick, determined steps, while the Queen and her daughters were escorted by guards to a secure chamber deep within the ship. The admiral stood at the center of the bridge, watching the tactical display, where a single red icon approached fast from the edge of sensor range. The officers reported that it was not broadcasting any identification, and its course led directly toward their position. The admiral ordered shields raised and weapons brought online, but he also cautioned against firing first until they knew the vessel's intent. The commander studied the readings and recognized that the ship's profile matched those of the enemy fleet responsible for destroying the alien Queen's vessel. This meant that whoever commanded it knew there was something valuable here. The admiral sent a tight beam communication demanding identification, but received only static in return. That silence felt deliberate, as if meant to unsettle them. The commander knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy acted, and he also knew that the Queen's presence on board was the most likely reason for their pursuit. Inside the secure chamber, the Queen's daughters remained standing despite the long journey that had brought them here. The elder spoke softly to her mother, while the younger paced like a caged predator. She told her mother that trusting humans so quickly was dangerous, and that their survival might depend on finding their own hidden allies. The Queen replied that allies are found in moments of shared risk, not in comfort, and that the commander had already proven his willingness to protect them even without understanding the full scope of the request. The younger daughter turned sharply when the commander entered the room to update them on the situation. Her eyes narrowed as if testing His sincerity, he told them plainly that an enemy ship was closing in, and that there was a chance more would follow the Valors. Reach was capable of fighting, but the enemy would likely try to capture rather than destroy them if they believed. The Queen was alive. That meant infiltration was a greater risk than open battle. The Queen listened calmly and then told him that if the enemy managed to take her, they would not keep her alive for long. She also warned that they might have already placed agents among the survivors taken from her wreck. This statement struck the commander like a stone because the prisoners had been moved into the ship's brig under minimal guard. Without delay, he and a squad of Marines headed there, moving. Through the narrow halls of the detention deck, he noticed 2 guards missing from their post. The door to the brig was unlocked, and inside they found 3 of the alien prisoners dead and 1 missing. The remaining captives claimed they had been attacked by a fellow survivor who had vanished through a maintenance hatch before the humans arrived. Security cameras showed only glimpses of a figure moving quickly through service tunnels, heading toward the ship's central systems. This was no ordinary escape. This was sabotage. The commander alerted the bridge, and the admiral ordered lockdown procedures. The lights shifted to red emergency mode in bulkheads, sealed behind the crew as they moved. The enemy vessel had now come close enough to show clearly on the main screen its hull, a sharp, angular shape built for speed and piercing strikes. Its weapons charged slowly in a pattern that suggested it was buying time, perhaps waiting for its infiltrator to disable the Valor's reach. From within, the commander led a team into the maintenance corridors, chasing the saboteur through narrow metal passages where each footstep echoed like thunder. The chase ended abruptly when the intruder turned to fight, revealing a face hidden behind a breathing mask and eyes filled with cold resolve. The battle was swift and brutal in the tight space. The saboteur moved with trained precision, but the commander's armor and strength gave him the advantage. When the fight ended, the saboteur lay unconscious, his device for cutting into the ship's power lines lying broken on the floor. The commander ordered him taken to the brig under heavy guard, this time with humans only. The ship's engineers quickly worked to repair the partial damage already done to the power grid, knowing that even small disruptions could have made them vulnerable to boarding on the bridge. The admiral decided that they could no longer wait for the enemy's move. He ordered the fleet to shift formation, using the asteroids around them for cover while preparing the counterattack. The Valor's reach turned slowly, hiding behind a massive rock as 2 smaller escort ships moved out to flank the enemy vessel. The tension in the air was heavy as every crew member understood that this was not just another skirmish. This was about keeping the Queen safe, and by extension, keeping humanity's potential alliance intact. While preparations continued, the commander returned to the secure chamber to speak with the Queen again. He told her about the infiltrator and the near disaster. She showed no visible surprise, only a quiet acceptance, as if she had expected such a move. She said that in her people's wars, it was common for enemies to use spies to weaken a target before striking, and that her rivals would not stop until she and her daughters were either dead or bound to someone who would serve their interests. She reminded him that accepting her request would make him a direct obstacle to those plans, and that such a choice would not come without personal cost. The younger daughter finally spoke to him without her earlier suspicion. She asked him if he truly believed humans would risk themselves for a foreign crown. He answered that humanity had fought for allies before, and that sometimes survival meant tying your fate to another, whether you liked it or not. His words seemed to soften her distrust, though her eyes still held a guarded light. The elder daughter simply nodded, as if acknowledging the truth she had already accepted. Moments later, the ship shuddered under the first distant impact of enemy fire. The enemy vessel had decided the waiting was over. The admiral's voice came through the intercom, ordering all hands to brace for evasive maneuvers. The Valor's reach surged forward, engines burning bright as it emerged from behind its cover, and unleashed a barrage of plasma fire at the enemy. The escort ship struck from the flanks, forcing the attacker into A defensive spiral, the Queen and her daughters remained under guard as the ship rocked with each exchange. Outside the viewports, the stars danced and weapons fire carved bright lines through the darkness. The commander knew this battle was only the beginning. The enemy had found them, and they would not stop. He also knew that the Queen's request and the decision it demanded of him would soon become unavoidable, whether by choice or by the force of events. His path and hers were now bound in ways neither could easily escape. The battle outside raged with blinding flashes of plasma, cutting through the darkness of space as the Valor's Reach rolled and dived between asteroid shadows. The enemy vessel was fast and its pilot skilled, weaving through the rocks with a predator's patience, waiting for a mistake. The human escorts held the flanks, hammering the enemy shields whenever an opening appeared. But the fight felt less like a single clash and more like the slow tightening of a noose inside the ship. The air was thick with tension, voices sharp over comms as engineers reported minor damage and medics stood ready for casualties. The commander moved between the bridge and the secure chamber, carrying updates and receiving orders, but his mind was not only on the battle. The Queen's request weighed heavily on him. Every moment her daughters' faces stayed in his thoughts, and he could feel the silent urgency behind their mother's calm words. When he entered the chamber again, the Queen was sitting upright, her pale skin reflecting the med bay lights, her eyes fixed on a point far beyond the walls, as if she could already see the path this day would take. She told him that battles end, but the war for survival continues long after the weapons fall silent, and that his decision could determine not just the fate of her bloodline, but the shape of the galaxy for generations. The younger daughter stood near the viewing screen, watching fragments of the fight through a live feed, her expression sharp and restless. The elder daughter stayed close to her mother, her hands folded, but her gaze never still. The commander told them the truth. The enemy ship was dangerous, but the bigger threat was the fleet that might follow if this one sent word. He explained that the only way to end this pursuit would be to make a public declaration that the Queen and her heirs were under human protection, which in their culture meant sealing the union she had spoken of. The Queen nodded and said that once such a vow was made, no rival could challenge her daughters without declaring open war on humanity itself. Before he could respond, the ship shook with a deep impact, alarms flaring as a breach was reported on the lower decks. Enemy boarding craft had used the cover of the asteroid belt to slip close and attach to the hull. Marines rushed to intercept, but the commander knew it was only a matter of time before the intruders pushed deeper. He ordered additional guards to the Queen's chamber, then joined the fight in the corridor where the boarding party was making its advance. The attackers were a mix of alien soldiers in dark armor, their weapons crackling with energy and their movements precise. The clash in the narrow halls was fierce, but the humans held their ground inch by inch, forcing the intruders back until the sound of retreat echoed through the ship. When he returned to the Queen, she was already speaking quietly to her daughters in their own tongue, then turned to him and said that the attack had proven her fears correct. There would be no end to the threats until her family was bound to a protector strong enough to deter all challengers. She told him that in her people's law, such a bond was not only political but spiritual. It joined not just two individuals, but two entire nations in a shared oath. She reminded him that he would not be marrying for love or custom, but for the survival of her world, and possibly his own, because enemies that crushed her people would not stop there. Admiral called him to the bridge to discuss options. The enemy vessel was damaged but still maneuvering among the asteroids. The Admiral wanted to press the advantage and destroy it before reinforcements arrived, but there was also the question of the Queen's safety. Every moment spent fighting here increased the risk of being cornered. The commander argued that if they destroyed this ship but left the political situation unresolved, the pursuit would never truly end. The Admiral finally said the choice was his to make, as he was the one the Queen had named. The weight of that responsibility pressed On him like the gravity of a dying starin, the quiet moments between orders. He remembered the day he first joined the fleet, the vow he had made to protect humanity, and all who sought its protection. He thought of the desperate look in the Queen's eyes when she had whispered her request in the ruins of her ship, and he thought of the thousands of lives tied to her and her daughter's lives that would vanish if he walked away. When he returned to the secure chamber, he found the Queen watching him silently as if she already knew his answer. He told her that he would accept the Union not as a man seeking the throne, but as a soldier accepting a duty. She inclined her head with regal grace and said that in her language there was no higher honor than to protect the future of a people. Almost at once preparations began for the symbolic ceremony to be held in the great hall of the Valor's Reach. It would be witnessed by senior officers and broadcast securely to both human command and the remaining loyalists of the Queen's realm. Engineers converted the hall into a space worthy of the moment with banners representing both peoples and a platform where the vow would be spoken. The Queen, though still weak, insisted on standing to give her blessing as her daughters took their places beside the commander. The elder daughter showed no fear, her voice steady as she recited the ancient words of her culture. The younger daughter glanced at him briefly, as if still measuring him, but then spoke her part with strength that matched her sister's. Moment the vows were completed, a message was sent through secure channels to her people, declaring the bond recognized by law and custom. The effect was immediate. Loyalist ships hidden across the sector acknowledged the message and pledged support. The enemy vessel still fighting in the asteroid belt received word of the Union, and its commander hesitated, knowing that to attack now would risk open war with humanity. That hesitation gave the admiral the opening he needed, ordering the fleet to strike with full force. The Valor's Reach surged forward, its weapons blazing until the enemy ship broke apart in the dark, leaving only drifting fragments behind. As the crew celebrated the victory, there was no sense that the war was over, but there was a new certainty among them. They had taken a step that bound their fate to another world, and though the path ahead was unknown, it was stronger for the choice made. The commander stood beside the Queen and her daughters, knowing that his life had changed forever, and that the next battle would be fought not only with weapons, but with the weight of an alliance that could not be broken. The air inside the great hall was filled with a strange calm after the storm of events that had shaken both the human and alien worlds. The human soldier stood near the high dais where the alien Queen rested, her skin pale, her breathing slow but steady. She had survived the collapse of her power, the betrayal from her council, and the threat that had almost destroyed both species. Her daughters stood nearby, their eyes full of worry, yet also carrying the strength of their mother's legacy. The human looked at them and understood that the Queen's strange request from the beginning was not only about marriage but about binding the two civilizations together in a way that no treaty or weapon could break. He stepped closer to the Queen and spoke with a steady voice, telling her that her wish would be honored, not as a command but as a bond of choice and unity. The daughters listened, their expressions softening as they realized this human was not here to claim power or land, but to stand with them in the rebuilding of their world. One of the daughters stepped forward, her voice quiet yet firm, saying that their mother had always believed peace was built on trust, not fear, and that if the human people and her people were to survive, they must walk together into the new dawn. Outside the great hall, the skies were clearing, the strange dark clouds that had lingered for weeks finally breaking apart to reveal twin suns shining down on the capital. The streets below were filled with both humans and aliens who had fought side by side against the threat. Their voices rose in cautious celebration, banners of both worlds fluttering together in the wind. The human soldier knew that the scars of battle would take time to heal, but he could already see the first signs of hope in the way old enemies exchanged nods and shared water from the same wells. The Queen stirred slightly, her eyes opening just enough to meet his. She whispered that the path ahead would not be easy, that there would be Those on both sides who would resist this union, but if they stood firm, the generations to come would inherit a world without the constant shadow of war. She asked him to promise that he would guide her daughters not as a ruler, but as a partner. In their journey, the human gave his word, and in that moment, the room seemed to breathe again, the heavy tension melting into something lighter. The daughters approached, each taking one of his hands, their faces reflecting a mix of respect, gratitude, and quiet determination. Together, they stepped forward to the balcony facing the gathered crowd. The cheers grew louder, the sight of them standing side by side, becoming a living symbol of the new alliance that had been forged not by conquest, but by compassion and shared sacrifice. The human spoke to the people, his voice carrying across the plaza, telling them that today marked the beginning of a future where human and alien no longer saw each other as strangers, but as family bound not just by treaties, but by the choices they would make together. That night the city glowed with lights, like stars brought down to the streets. Music and laughter mingled with the sound of the night breeze. The daughters walked among the people, their guards set aside their hands, touching those who came to greet them. The human remained close, watching over them, but not as a soldier guarding royalty, rather as a friend walking beside. Equals the queen from her resting place could hear the sounds of joy drifting in through the open windows, and she allowed herself a rare smile, knowing that her final request had not only been understood but embraced in spirit. In the weeks that followed, plans were laid for the joining of their worlds. Trade routes were reopened, schools were built where human children and alien children learned in the same rooms. The daughters proved themselves wise and fair leaders, and the human remained by their side, not as a figure of power, but as a steady bridge between their peoples. When the first harvest festival came, both worlds celebrated together, under the twin suns, sharing food, music, and stories of the great trials they had faced and overcome. Years later, the queen's name was still spoken with reverence, not because she had ruled with an iron hand, but because she had dared to imagine a future no one else had believed possible. The human and the daughters continued her work, carrying forward the fragile yet growing bond that had been born the day she had whispered her strange yet powerful request in the middle of chaos and war. And as the people danced under the open skies, they knew that the story of that moment would be told for generations, a story not of conquest but of unity. End.